It was an ordinary Tuesday, just another day in the life of James Wilson, 53 years old, a bus driver for 27 years in the city of Portland. At that exact moment, at 7:42 in the morning, while driving Route 47 with 38 passengers on board, James had no idea that the next 10 seconds would define whether he would be remembered as a hero or forgotten as a statistic. This is the story of how an invisible man, doing a job that most people ignore, made a decision that defied all human survival instincts. And before we begin, I want you to do something. Tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we share stories of heroes who are everywhere around us, but nobody sees. Stories that will change the way you see the world. Because this story is going to completely transform how you view the people around you. James Wilson woke up at 5:15 in the morning, as he had done for 27 years. 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year. You can do the math. That's thousands of identical mornings. Thousands of times pressing the same alarm button. Thousands of cups of coffee prepared in the same old coffee maker that his wife Linda bought at a clearance sale 15 years ago. James wasn't special. At least that's not what he thought. He was just one more among millions of people who wake up before the sun rises to make the city work. While you're still sleeping, while you're still deciding what clothes to wear, while you're still thinking about whether to have breakfast or not, James is already on the street, already behind the wheel, already transporting dozens of lives through the city. James's routine was so precise you could set your watch by it. 5:15, wakes up. 5:20, shower for exactly 8 minutes. 5:35, black coffee without sugar and 2 slices of toast with butter. 5:50, kisses Linda on the forehead while she's still sleeping. 6 o'clock, leaves home. 6:20, arrives at the company garage. 6:30, starts checking bus number 342. 6:45, starts the engine. 7 o'clock, first route of the day. But what most people don't know about James Wilson is that he wasn't just a bus driver, he was an observer. 27 years driving the same routes creates something that no training can teach. You develop a sixth sense. You start to notice patterns. You start to notice when something is different. When that lady from the second stop doesn't show up 3 days in a row, you worry. When that teenager who always boards with headphones suddenly doesn't have them, you notice. When that man in a suit who always sits in the same place chooses another seat, you register it. James knew his regular passengers better than he knew some members of his own family. There was Miss Thompson, 82 years old, who boarded every Tuesday and Thursday to go to the community center.
There was young David, 17 years old, always with school books, always studying for some test. There was Nurse Rodriguez, who worked the night shift and always boarded exhausted, but still smiled at James. There was Mr. Patterson, a war veteran, who always sat behind the driver and always said good morning. These people weren't just passengers to James. They were responsibilities. They were lives he transported. They were people who trusted him to get home safely. And James took that responsibility so seriously that in 27 years, in more than 10,000 working days, he never, not once, had a serious accident, never hurt a passenger, never put a life at risk. His record was impeccable. His conscience was clear. He was good at what he did, maybe even excellent. But excellence in an invisible job remains invisible. On that Tuesday, March 7th, everything started exactly like any other day. James completed his morning checked the brakes, the mirrors, the seat belts, the tire pressure. Everything perfectly functional. Everything within parameters. At 7 o'clock sharp, he started his route. First stop, 3 passengers boarded. Second stop, 5 more. Third stop, Miss Thompson wasn't there. That was strange. She never missed Tuesdays. James made a mental note to ask other passengers if anyone knew anything. Fourth stop, 7 more passengers. Fifth stop, David boarded, as always, with his books. Sixth stop, Nurse Rodriguez, exhausted as always. Seventh stop, Mr. Patterson. Good morning, James. Good morning, Mr. Patterson. The same conversation as always. The same comforting ritual. At 7:35, the bus had 38 passengers. It was full but not crowded. It was a normal number for that time. An ordinary Tuesday, an ordinary morning. People going to work, to school, to the hospital, to wherever they needed to be. James was driving down Oak Avenue, one of the city's main roads, 4 lanes, 2 in each direction, trees on both sides, commercial buildings, some stores, a park on the right. It was an avenue James knew like the back of his hand. Every speed bump, every traffic light, every curve. He could drive that route with his eyes closed. Not that he did that, of course. James was too careful for that. Traffic was flowing well. Nothing abnormal, nothing extraordinary. Just another day in the life of another bus driver doing another route. Passengers did what passengers always do. Some looked at their cell phones. Some talked quietly. Some just looked out the window, lost in thoughts. Nurse Rodriguez had her eyes closed, trying to take advantage of every second to rest. David was studying, as always. Mr. Patterson looked out the window, observing the city he had known for so long. James looked at the dashboard clock. 7:41. He was on time. Perfectly on time. The next stop would be in 3 minutes. More passengers would board. Some would get off. The routine would continue.
The day would continue. Everything would continue exactly as it always had been. But sometimes, life has other plans. Sometimes, in a matter of seconds, everything can change. Sometimes you're driving on an ordinary Tuesday, and suddenly, you're in the middle of the most important decision you've ever made in your life. 7:42 in the morning. James was driving at 60 kilometers per hour, the speed limit of the avenue. Ahead, the traffic light was green. Everything normal. But then, in the corner of his left eye, James saw something. It was just a flash, a quick movement, a car coming from the perpendicular street, coming too fast for the red light it definitely had. Now, here's something you need to understand about human reflexes. The average reaction time of a person is approximately 250 milliseconds, a quarter of a second. That's how long it takes your brain to process what your eyes are seeing and send a command to your muscles. But James Wilson wasn't an ordinary person. 27 years behind the wheel had transformed his reflexes into something superhuman. He didn't think. There was no internal debate. There was no weighing of options. His body reacted before his conscious brain could process the danger. James saw the car, a silver sedan, coming down Oak Street at a speed he instantly estimated to be over 120 kilometers per hour. The car wasn't slowing down, wasn't braking, was accelerating, and it was on a direct collision course with the left side of the bus, with the side where 12 passengers were sitting, with the side where Nurse Rodriguez was sitting, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, with the side where a mother with her 6-month-old baby was sitting, with the side where David was sitting, studying for his physics test. At that moment, James Wilson had 3 options, only 3, and he had approximately 10 seconds to choose. Option 1, brake abruptly. Stop the bus right there and let the sedan collide with the left side. This option would save James, would save the passengers on the right side, but the passengers on the left side, they wouldn't have a chance. A car at 120 kilometers per hour colliding with the side of a stopped bus. The consequences would be catastrophic, fatal for most, critical for all. Option 2, accelerate. Try to pass through the intersection before the sedan arrived. It was a gamble. If James succeeded, everyone would be saved. If he miscalculated by half a second, the sedan would hit the rear part of the bus, would hit where Mr. Patterson was sitting, where a group of college students was sitting, where a pregnant lady was sitting. And with the sedan's speed, the impact on the rear could make the bus flip over, could transform a serious accident into an absolute tragedy. Option 3, the option that no training teaches, the option that goes against all survival instincts, the option that requires not only courage, but a form of altruism we rarely see in the real world. Turn the steering wheel sharply to the left. Put the front of the bus directly in the sedan's trajectory. Make the bus a shield. Make himself a target. Absorb the impact with the most reinforced part of the vehicle, protecting all passengers. But this option had a detail, a crucial detail, a detail that James understood instantly. This option placed the driver directly in the impact zone. This option transformed James Wilson from driver into human shield. And here's what you need to understand. James didn't have 10 seconds to think about it. He didn't have time to ponder, didn't have time to consider the consequences, didn't have time to think about Linda, his wife of 30 years, didn't have time to think about Emily, who was in her last year of college, didn't have time to think about Thomas, who had just gotten his first job, didn't have time to think it was his last week before the vacation he and Linda had been planning for months, a trip to see the grandchildren for the first time in 2 years.
James Wilson had only one thought, just one. 38 people had entrusted their lives to him that morning. 38 people had boarded his bus believing they would reach their destination safely. And James Wilson was not going to disappoint those people, no matter the cost. Everything happened in slow motion and at maximum speed at the same time. James turned the steering wheel. His hands moved with a precision that came from decades of experience. He didn't turn too sharply, which would make the bus tip over. Didn't turn too little, which wouldn't be enough to protect the passengers. He turned at exactly the right angle, at the right moment, with the right force. It was a movement that combined physics, geometry, experience, and something that can only be described as pure intuition. The bus began to turn. Passengers felt the sudden movement. Some screamed. Some held on to the supports. Some simply froze, not understanding what was happening. Nurse Rodriguez opened her eyes. David dropped his book. Mr. Patterson grabbed the seat in front of him. The mother held her baby tighter. Everyone felt that moment of pure terror when you know something is wrong but don't know exactly what. James kept his foot firm on the accelerator. He couldn't brake now. Braking would change the dynamics of the movement. Braking could make the bus stop in the wrong place. He needed speed, needed momentum, needed to put the reinforced front of the bus exactly where the sedan was going to be in 3 seconds, 2 seconds, 1 second. The sedan was coming. James could see the driver now. A young man, maybe 25 years old, eyes wide with terror, hands gripping the steering wheel, mouth open in a silent scream. The man knew he was going to collide, knew he no longer had control.
Knew that the next seconds would decide whether he would live or die. James saw all of this in an instant, saw the fear in that man's eyes, and even so, he didn't hesitate. The bus completed its maneuver. The front of the vehicle was now perpendicular to the traffic flow, was blocking the left lane, was exactly where James wanted it to be. And then, with a precision that seemed impossible, that seemed orchestrated by something beyond human ability, James stepped on the brake. Not an abrupt brake, a calculated brake. A brake that decreased the bus's speed, but maintained its position. A brake that transformed the bus from a moving vehicle into a stationary barrier. A barrier that had exactly the mass, height, and resistance necessary for what was about to happen. The sedan hit the front of the bus. The sound was deafening. Metal against metal, glass shattering, plastic deforming. It was the sound of 2 tons of steel colliding with 15 tons of reinforced steel. It was the sound of brute force meeting immovable mass. It was the sound of pure physics in action. The impact made the bus recoil about 3 meters, made the entire vehicle shake, made passengers be thrown forward, then backward. But the bus didn't tip over, didn't go out of control, didn't disintegrate. The sedan, on the other hand, was completely destroyed. The front of the car literally disappeared. The engine was pushed into the driver's compartment. The windshield exploded into 1,000 pieces. The airbags were deployed. The doors were stuck. The car became unrecognizable. And James, sitting in the driver's seat, was directly in the center of all this destruction. The steering wheel had bent against his chest. The dashboard had come toward him. His feet were trapped under deformed pedals. But he was conscious, was alive, and more importantly, he immediately turned his head back, checked the passengers one by one. His scanning eyes swept the entire bus in seconds. Nurse Rodriguez was shaken but unharmed. David had a cut on his forehead from hitting the seat in front, but was okay. The mother was holding her baby, who was crying but was intact. Mr. Patterson was pale but gave James a thumbs up. The college students were helping each other stand up. The pregnant lady was being assisted by other passengers. One by one, James Wilson confirmed that all 38 passengers were alive. All were relatively unharmed. Minor injuries, nothing critical, nothing fatal. All alive. And only then, only after making sure everyone was okay, James Wilson allowed his body to feel the pain, allowed his consciousness to register that he had 3 broken ribs, that his left arm was fractured, that he had internal bleeding, that he needed immediate medical attention. But even so, before the darkness came, before he lost consciousness, James Wilson did one last thing. He pressed the emergency button, activated the communication system.
And with a voice that was a little more than a whisper, he said, "All passengers are safe. Send help." The silence that followed the impact lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but for the people inside that bus, they seemed like 3 eternities. 3 eternities where each person processed what had just happened. 3 eternities where each brain tried to understand how they were still alive. 3 eternities where reality slowly returned to bodies, still in shock. And then, chaos. Not a chaos of panic, but a chaos of action. Nurse Rodriguez was the first to move. Her years of medical training overrode the shock. She stood up, quickly checked that she could move, and immediately went to James. She saw immediately that he was seriously injured, saw the steering wheel pressed against his chest, saw the way he was breathing, shallow and labored, saw the blood starting to stain his shirt. "Don't move him," she shouted to the other passengers who were starting to approach. "He has internal injuries. Don't touch him. Just stay with him." Mr. Patterson was already on the phone with emergency services. His voice, normally calm and measured, was tense but controlled. "Serious accident at Oak Avenue and 15th Street. Bus line 47. Driver seriously injured. Approximately 40 people at the scene. We need multiple ambulances, now." He gave the information with military precision. Every important detail, every relevant fact. No panic, just information. David, the student, was helping other passengers exit the bus. The rear door had jammed in the impact, but the middle doors still worked. One by one, he guided people out, checked if each one could walk, if anyone needed support, if anyone was too much in shock to move on their own. He became a leader without even realizing it. His youth didn't matter. His inexperience didn't matter. He simply did what needed to be done. Outside the bus, the world was reacting. Cars stopped. Drivers got out of their vehicles. Pedestrians ran to help. Someone brought a first aid kit. Someone started directing traffic away from the scene. Someone covered the pregnant lady with a coat because she was shaking. Humanity at its best. People helping people. Strangers becoming allies in a moment of crisis. The first sirens were heard 4 minutes and 30 seconds after the impact. The first emergency vehicle to arrive was a police car. 2 officers ran out and immediately assessed the situation. One went straight to the sedan, where the young driver was trapped but conscious. The other went to the bus, where Nurse Rodriguez was still beside James. "Paramedics are coming," the officer said. "Hold on." James didn't respond. His eyes were closed. His breathing was irregular, but his pulse was strong. He was fighting. 3 minutes later, 5 ambulances arrived at the scene. Paramedics spread out quickly. 2 went straight to James.
Nurse Rodriguez briefed quickly. Probable thoracic trauma, possible internal bleeding, fracture and left arm trapped by steering wheel. The paramedics worked with professional efficiency. Cervical collar, intravenous line, oxygen, preparation for extraction. They knew every second counted, knew James was in critical condition, knew they needed to get him out of there quickly but carefully. It took 17 minutes to extract James from the bus, 17 minutes of meticulous and careful work. They cut the steering wheel, removed parts of the dashboard, stabilized his body, and finally, with a coordination that seemed like a rehearsed dance, they moved him to the stretcher. James briefly gained consciousness when they moved him. His eyes opened. He looked around, searching. "The passengers," he whispered. "Everyone's okay," Nurse Rodriguez said, holding his hand. "Everyone's okay because of you." A small smile appeared on James's face, and then he closed his eyes again. The ambulance departed with sirens on, taking James Wilson to Portland Central Hospital. Inside it, the paramedics worked nonstop, checking vital signs, administering medications, keeping James stable. And on the radio, they transmitted, "Serious trauma arriving. ETA 4 minutes. Prepare trauma room. This one's priority." While James fought for his life in the hospital, at the accident scene, another process was beginning, the investigation. 3 detectives from the traffic division arrived at the scene 20 minutes after the impact. Their job was to reconstruct exactly what had happened, and what they discovered in the next few hours would reveal something extraordinary, something that would transform James Wilson from accident victim into something much more. The lead investigator was Detective Sarah Martinez, a 15-year veteran in the Traffic Accidents Division. She had seen everything: accidents caused by fatigue, by alcohol, by distraction, by incompetence. But when she began analyzing the scene, something didn't make sense. The tire marks on the asphalt told a story, and it was a story she had never seen before. Martinez called her team. "You guys seeing this?" she asked, pointing to the marks. The bus didn't try to brake in a straight line, didn't try to swerve to the right, which would be the natural response. It turned left, directly toward the vehicle that was coming. Why? Why would a driver do that? It's against all instincts. It's against all logic of survival. The team began taking measurements, angles, distances, speeds. They photographed every inch of the scene, every skid mark, every piece of metal, every glass fragment. And slowly, an image began to form. An image that revealed not an accident, but a deliberate maneuver, a calculated maneuver. A maneuver that could only have been executed by someone with exceptional skill and extraordinary courage. Martinez requested the security recordings. There were 4 traffic cameras at the intersection.
4 different angles, 4 perspectives of the same story. She sat in the patrol car and began to watch. The first camera showed the sedan approaching at high speed. She could see the exact moment when the traffic light turned red for it, could see that it didn't slow down. In fact, it seemed to be accelerating. The second camera showed the bus approaching with the green light. Everything normal, everything within the rules. The third camera, positioned on the other side of the intersection, captured everything. Captured the moment when the bus began to turn, captured the precision of the maneuver, captured the impact. And the fourth camera, inside the bus, provided by the transportation company, showed something that made Martinez stop and rewind 3 times. It showed James Wilson, showed his focused eyes, showed his hands on the steering wheel, showed that there was no hesitation, there was no panic, there was only decided and precise action. And more importantly, it showed that in the 2 seconds before impact, James turned his head back, checked his passengers, calculated where each one was sitting, and adjusted his angle. He didn't just put the bus in the sedan's trajectory, he put it in the exact position that would maximize protection for passengers. It was applied physics in real time. It was geometry in motion. It was pure genius under impossible pressure. Martinez called an expert in collision dynamics, Professor Michael Chen from the University of Portland, a man who had spent 30 years studying traffic accidents. She showed the recordings, showed the measurements, showed the marks, and asked, "Is it possible this was intentional?" The professor watched in silence, watched again, made some quick calculations in a notebook, measured angles on the computer screen, and finally spoke. "Not only is it possible it was intentional, it's impossible that it wasn't." The professor explained, the bus was at 60 kilometers per hour. The sedan was at approximately 125 kilometers per hour. The distance between them when the bus driver started the maneuver was approximately 50 meters. That means he had less than 2 seconds to react. But look at the angle. Look at the precision. He didn't just turn the bus, he positioned it at an angle of approximately 45 degrees relative to the sedan's trajectory. You know what that means? That's the ideal angle to distribute the impact force. It's the angle that maximizes the deformation of the bus's front, which acts as an absorption zone, while minimizing the force transfer to the passenger compartment. The professor continued, now more animated, and look how he maintained speed until the last moment and only then braked. This maintained the bus's momentum, which stabilized the vehicle on impact. If he had braked earlier, the bus could have tipped over. If he hadn't braked, the recoil would have been greater, and more passengers would have been injured.
He calculated all this in less than 2 seconds. This isn't luck. This isn't reflex. This is skill at the level of professional pilots. It's something that not even training can fully teach. It's intuition developed over decades, combined with courage to act against all self-preservation instincts. Martinez knew what she had. She had evidence of something rare, something that statistically happens maybe once in 10 million accidents. She had evidence of calculated heroism, of deliberate sacrifice, of a man who looked death in the eyes and decided that 38 other lives were worth more than his own. And she needed to tell this story, needed the world to know. In the hours and days that followed the accident, the story began to spread, and the passengers, one by one, began to speak, began to tell their versions, began to share what they saw, what they felt, what they understood about those 10 seconds that changed their lives forever. Nurse Rodriguez was the first to give an interview. She spoke to a local reporter, and her words were direct and powerful. "I work in an emergency room for 20 years. I've seen heroism of all kinds. Doctors operating for 12 hours straight to save a life. Nurses running into war zones to help the wounded. Paramedics risking their lives in dangerous situations. But what James Wilson did," she paused, emotional, "was something different. He didn't have hours to think, didn't have special training for this situation. He had seconds and an impossible choice. And he chose to protect us, chose to be the shield. I was sleeping when it happened. I woke up with the impact and immediately thought I was going to die. But I didn't die, because James decided I wasn't going to, that none of us were going to." Mr. Patterson, the war veteran, also spoke. His perspective was different, shaped by years of experience in life or death situations. "I've been in combat, saw men making impossible decisions under enemy fire, saw soldiers throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. And what James did was exactly that. It was the civilian equivalent of throwing yourself on a grenade. He saw the danger, calculated in an instant that he could save all of us if he made himself the target, and didn't hesitate. That's the kind of courage medals are made of, the kind of courage stories are told about, the kind of courage most people will never have to demonstrate, but that we should all hope to have if the moment came." David, the student, had a more personal perspective. "I was studying for a physics test.
Ironic, right? All that theory about forces, momentum, collisions. And then I lived through all of it, felt the force of the collision, felt the bus moving in ways that defy what you expect. And when I understood what had happened, when I realized that James had deliberately placed the bus and himself between us in that car, I understood something about physics that no book could teach.
I understood that numbers and equations describe the world, but courage defines who we are. James didn't calculate the forces. He simply decided we were more important, and no equation can capture that. The mother with the 6-month-old baby spoke through tears. My son is 6 months old. He's barely started living, and a man he'll never remember, that he'll probably never properly meet, saved his life. How do I thank that? How do I teach my son about what happened? How do I explain that the kindness of strangers, that the courage of ordinary people is what keeps the world working? James Wilson had no special obligation to my son. He was just the bus driver. But he became my baby's life guardian, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to honor that. But perhaps the most impactful testimony came from an unexpected source, from the young man who was driving the sedan, the man who caused the accident. His name was Tyler Morrison, 23 years old, and he had a story to tell, a story that added another layer of complexity to the entire event. Tyler was in the hospital with multiple fractures but stable, and when he was ready to speak, he specifically asked to speak with the press. His voice was weak but clear. I was driving to the hospital. My mother had just had a heart attack. I got the call and panicked. Didn't think, just drove. Drove too fast, ignored the traffic light, did everything wrong, and I was going to kill dozens of people because of it. There was no excuse for what I did. But that bus driver, James, he saved everyone, including me. He could have braked and let me hit the side where I would have died instantly, but he put himself in front, absorbed the impact, and somehow, impossibly, both I and everyone on the bus survived. He saved the people I put in danger, and saved me from becoming an involuntary killer. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that sacrifice. While the world outside the hospital began to know and celebrate James Wilson's story, inside Portland Central Hospital, a battle was being fought. A battle for the life of a hero who still didn't know he was a hero. James had been taken directly to the trauma room, where a team of 6 doctors and 8 nurses awaited him. Dr. Michael Reeves, chief of trauma surgery, led the team, and when he saw James's condition, he knew it would be one of the most difficult operations of his career. The injuries were extensive: 3 broken ribs, one of which had punctured the left lung, causing a pneumothorax, compound fracture in the left arm, significant internal bleeding in the spleen, cardiac contusion, and possible cervical spine injury. Any one of these injuries individually would be serious. All together were potentially fatal. Dr. Reeves had to prioritize, had to decide what to treat first, and had to work fast. The first hour was critical. The team stabilized James, inserted a chest tube to reinflate the lung, and began blood transfusion.
He had lost almost 2 liters. His body was in shock. His organs were beginning to fail. But James Wilson, the man who had spent 27 years driving with perfect safety, who never gave up, who always completed his route, was fighting. His heart, though contused, kept beating. His lungs, though damaged, kept trying to breathe. He was fighting for life with the same determination he had shown in those 10 fateful seconds. The surgery lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of meticulous work. 9 hours where every decision mattered. 9 hours where the line between life and death was so thin it could be measured in heartbeats. Dr. Reeves removed the damaged spleen, repaired the punctured lung, stabilized the broken ribs, placed a titanium plate in the fractured arm, and throughout the process, he kept an eye on the vital monitors, waiting, hoping that James would hold on. Outside the operating room, a crowd was forming. Linda Wilson, James's wife, had arrived an hour after the accident. She was pale, in shock, holding her daughter Emily's hand. Thomas, the son, was on the phone trying to get an earlier flight home. And around them, an unlikely collection of people. Bus passengers who refused to leave, James's co-workers who dropped everything to be there. And slowly, as the news spread, complete strangers who simply wanted to show support. Nurse Rodriguez was there,
still in her uniform, dirty from the accident. Mr. Patterson sat in silence, his hands clasped as if in prayer. David had brought flowers. The mother with the baby had made a card. And Tyler Morrison, the young man from the sedan, was there too, in a wheelchair, his face full of guilt and hope. All united by those 10 seconds. All connected by a moment that changed their lives. When Dr. Reeves finally came out of the operating room, 9 hours and 40 minutes after James had been admitted, everyone stood up. Linda Wilson walked to him, her face a mask of controlled fear. The doctor removed his surgical mask. "He's alive," were his first words, and you could feel the entire room exhale at the same time. "He's alive. The surgery was successful. We repaired the main damage. But," he paused, and everyone knew there was more. "He's not out of danger. The next 48 hours will be critical. He's in an induced coma to give the body time to recover. He has a long road ahead, but he's a fighter, and if anyone can overcome this, it's him." Linda Wilson began to cry, not from despair, but from relief. Her daughter hugged her. Her son, having just arrived from an emergency flight, joined the embrace. And around them, that unlikely collection of people, united by fate and by one man's courage, shared tears of hope. 3 days, 72 hours, 4,320 minutes. That's how long James Wilson spent in an induced coma. That's how long the world waited to know if the hero would survive to know his own story. And during those 3 days, something extraordinary happened.
James's story spread, not just locally, but nationally, internationally. The security recordings were released. Experts analyzed the maneuver. Journalists investigated his life. And slowly, the world discovered who James Wilson was. They discovered he had never missed a day of work in 27 years. They discovered he had a perfect safety record. They discovered that coworkers described him as the most careful driver they knew. They discovered that regular passengers loved him, that children waved to him every morning, that he always had a kind word, a smile, a moment of humanity amidst the city rush. They discovered he was a volunteer at a shelter on weekends, that he donated to charity silently, that he had helped pay for college for a young neighbor who didn't have resources. They discovered, in short, that James Wilson didn't become a hero in those 10 seconds. He had always been a hero. Those 10 seconds just revealed to the world what the people around him already knew. On the 3rd day, Dr. Reeves made the decision to start reducing sedation. It was time to see if James would wake up, if his brain, deprived of oxygen during those critical moments after the accident, still functioned normally, if the man who had saved 38 lives was still there. Linda was by the bedside when they started. She held James's hand, spoke to him softly. "James," she said, "it's time to come back. The kids are here. I'm here. Everyone's waiting for you." It took 6 hours. 6 hours of agonizing waiting. 6 hours where every small movement was analyzed. Every muscle contraction was a sign of hope. And then, slowly, like a tide returning, James began to come back. His fingers moved. His eyelids trembled. His breathing changed. And finally, gradually, his eyes opened. They were confused at first, unfocused, trying to understand where he was, what had happened. He saw the white hospital ceiling, saw the machines around him, saw the tube in his throat. And then, his eyes found Linda. She was crying, but smiling. She squeezed his hand. "Welcome back," she whispered. James tried to speak, but the breathing tube prevented it. He made a sound of frustration. Dr. Reeves approached. "Mr. Wilson," he said calmly, "you're in the hospital. You were in an accident, but you're okay. You're going to be okay. Just relax. We'll remove the tube in a few hours when we're sure you can breathe on your own. For now, just rest." James tried to nod, but even that small movement caused pain. His eyes closed again, not returning to coma, but simply exhausted from the effort. When the tube was finally removed, 6 hours later, when James could finally speak, his first words weren't about himself, weren't about his pain, his injuries, his recovery. His first words were, "The passengers. Are they all okay?" Linda laughed through tears. "Yes, my love. Everyone's okay. Everyone's alive because of you." James closed his eyes, and this time, a tear ran down his face. Just one.
And then he whispered, "Good. That's good." In the following days, as James regained strength, he began to understand what had happened. Nurses told him about the vigil outside. Linda showed him some of the thousands of cards and messages that arrived daily. Dr. Reeves explained the extent of his injuries and the miracle of his survival. And slowly, James Wilson, the invisible man, the bus driver nobody noticed, began to understand that he was no longer invisible. Began to understand that those 10 seconds had changed not only the passengers' lives, but his own life in ways he was just beginning to comprehend. When James was strong enough to receive visitors, they began. One by one, the people whose lives he had saved came to thank him, and each visit was a scene loaded with emotion that words can hardly capture. The first was Nurse Rodriguez. She entered the room with a shy smile, carrying a small plant. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice still weak. "How are you?" She laughed, a laugh that was half cry. "How am I? James, you saved my life. How do you think I am?" She sat beside the bed. "I wanted to thank you, not just for saving me, but for reminding me why I became a nurse, to help people, to make a difference. You did that every day for 27 years, without recognition, without glory, just doing your job with excellence and care. You are my inspiration now." Mr. Patterson came next. The war veteran who had seen so many things in his life was clearly emotional. He entered, stood at attention for a moment, and then saluted James. This surprised James. "Mr. Patterson, you don't need to," he began. "Yes, I do," the old veteran interrupted. "You did something that few men have the courage to do. You put other lives before your own without hesitation. That deserves respect. That deserves recognition." The two men then talked for an hour, about life, about choices, about what it means to be a hero. And when Mr. Patterson left, James had tears in his eyes. David, the student, brought something different. He brought his physics books. "Mr. Wilson," he said, "I want you to sign this." James was confused. "Why?" "Because," David explained, "every time I study physics now, I'm going to remember that numbers and equations describe the world, but people like you define it. You taught me more in 10 seconds than I learned in years of school. Taught me about courage, about sacrifice, about doing what's right even when it's impossible." James signed the book with his good hand, still uncomfortable with all the attention. The mother with the baby was perhaps the most emotional visit. She entered carrying her son, now almost 7 months old. "Mr. Wilson," she said, her voice trembling, "this is Miguel. He's here, he's alive, he's going to grow up and have a life, all because of you." She paused, trying to control her emotions. "I don't know how to thank someone for saving your child's life. There are no words for that, but I promise I'll tell him about you.
I'll make sure he knows that in the world there are good people, courageous people, people like you. Miguel will grow up knowing that kindness and courage exist." She asked if she could take a photo. James, still uncomfortable with attention, agreed. That photo would be one of the most shared images in the coming weeks. But perhaps the most difficult visit was from Tyler Morrison, the young man who had caused the accident. He entered hesitantly, supported by crutches, clearly nervous. "Mr. Wilson," he began, and then stopped. Didn't know how to continue. James looked at him for a long moment, and then said, "Sit down, Tyler. Let's talk." Tyler sat, and everything came out at once. The apologies, the guilt, the terror of that moment, the impossible gratitude, the weight of knowing his recklessness almost killed 40 people. And James listened to everything without interrupting. And when Tyler finally finished, emotionally exhausted, James spoke. "Tyler, you made a mistake, a terrible mistake that could have caused many lives. But you're here, alive, and you have the chance to do better, have the chance to live in a way that honors that second chance. I can't say I'm not angry. I am. But I also understand you're human, that you were in panic, that you made a bad decision in a moment of fear. What you do now is what matters, how you live from here forward, how you ensure this mistake never repeats." Tyler was crying openly now. "I promise, Mr. Wilson, I promise I'll live in a way that honors what you did, that honors the chance you gave me." James nodded. "That's all I can ask." 3 months after the accident, James Wilson was discharged from the hospital. He would still need physical therapy, would still have to wear a sling for 6 more weeks, would still have physical limitations for the rest of his life. But he was alive, was walking, was talking, was smiling, and was about to discover how much the world had changed while he recovered. When he left the hospital, he didn't expect what he found. There were hundreds of people waiting, bus passengers, co-workers, neighbors, strangers who simply wanted to thank him. When James appeared at the door, supported by Linda, the crowd began to applaud, and applauded, and applauded. And James Wilson, the invisible man, stood there, overwhelmed by emotion,
trying to process that all of this was for him. In the following weeks, recognitions began to arrive. The city of Portland declared the day of the accident as James Wilson Day. The bus company created an annual safety award with his name. The local university offered a scholarship in his name. And then came the big recognition, a national ceremony, the Medal of Citizenship for Heroism. James tried to refuse. "I just did my job," he insisted. But those who knew the story knew it wasn't true. He didn't just do his job. He went beyond any call of duty. He exemplified the best of humanity.
At the ceremony, held 6 months after the accident, James was on stage, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing that this moment wasn't about him. It was about what he represented. It was about the thousands of invisible workers who make society function. It was about recognizing that heroism isn't just in uniforms and capes. It's in daily choices. It's in doing what's right. It's in putting others before yourself. When he received the medal, when he had to make a speech, James Wilson, who had spent 27 years being invisible, finally had to speak to the world. "I'm not a hero," he began, and the crowd began to protest. He raised his hand. "Let me finish. I'm not a hero because what I did wasn't extraordinary. It was what anyone should do. It was doing what was right at the moment it was necessary. True heroes are the people who do this every day without recognition. They're the teachers who stay extra hours to help a student. They're the nurses who hold the hands of patients who have no one. They're the janitors who keep our spaces clean and safe. They're the parents who work 2 jobs to give their children a better future. They're all the invisible people who keep the world working. And now, let me say something to you who are watching. Look around. See the people you don't normally see. The bus driver, the cashier, the security guard, the delivery person. All these people have stories. All have value. All deserve respect. And who knows, maybe one day, one of them will have to make an impossible choice. Will have to decide between themselves and you. I was lucky to be able to make that choice and survive. Not everyone has that luck. So honor these people. Recognize these people. See these people. Because they are the true heroes. Not me. Never me. Always them. And with that, James Wilson, the invisible hero, left the stage, returned to Linda, who was crying with pride, returned to his family, and eventually, 7 months after the accident, returned to his job, returned to Route 47, returned to the bus steering wheel. Because for James Wilson, that was never just a job. It was a purpose. It was a vocation. It was a way to serve. And nothing, not even almost dying, would change that. Today, if you take Route 47 in Portland, you might find James Wilson, still driving, still doing what he always did, still waking up at 5:15, still greeting passengers, still being excellent at a job most consider invisible. The difference now is that people see, people thank, people recognize. And maybe, just maybe, James Wilson's story reminds us of something fundamental about humanity. That heroism isn't in powers or capes. It's in choices. It's in doing what's right when it's difficult. It's in seeing the value in every life. And it's in ordinary people doing extraordinary things, simply because it's what must be done. James Wilson didn't want to be a hero. He just wanted to do his job well.
And by doing that, by making the choice few would have the courage to make, he showed us what humanity can be when it's at its best. And now I come back to you, who was listening to this story. Leave in the comments which city you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Because we share stories of heroes who are everywhere, but nobody sees. Because after this story, you'll never look at a bus driver the same way again. You'll never ignore the people who make the world work. And who knows, maybe one day, if you're in an impossible situation, you'll also have the courage to be a hero. The courage to do what's right. The courage to be like James Wilson.